Finally tonight, a profile of writer Oliver Sacks. The profiler is Joanna Simon.
Oliver Sacks writes almost every day, and often in the Bronx Botanical Gardens, a short distance from his home in New York City. The thoughts he's cultivated here, amidst the ferns, have grown into several books, including his bestseller, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat.
I find it very peaceful here. I like to come almost every day, and it puts me in a tranquil frame of mind. It's my tranquilizer. And then thoughts start to come to me, and I have a botanically green pen, a notebook, and I sort of start to think among the plants. And it works, this sort of discharges the tensions of the day.
For Sacks, the tensions of the day are not limited to writer's block. They also stem from his other career as a medical doctor. Sacks is a specialist in neurology, and he regularly makes rounds at 5 New York City hospitals. Many of his patients have devastating and often irreversible neurological diseases. But where others might see cause for despair, Sacks finds inspiration. Ruth Yellen has been hospitalized at Beth Abraham since suffering a stroke in 1958. Harry Levitt, born with cerebral palsy, has been there since 1948.
Do the two of you get out on some excursions?
Yes, we go out from here.
Yes. Well, where do you usually go?
We go to the racetrack.
The racetrack? Which one? Belmont?
Belmont.
Right. Yeah. Did you win anything last time?
Well,
we win, you lose.
We lose. We win, we lose.
Yes, you sound philosophical about it. I'm addicted to patients. I can't do without them. I need to have the feeling of these other lives which become a part of my own. Empathy isn't enough. I wish I could be in their shoes or know more exactly what it's like.
This kind of dedication runs in Sacks's family. He was born in London in 1933 to parents who were both physicians. His 94-year-old father still practices medicine.
My parents both trained neurologically. It was sort of taken for granted that I would follow them. They were not only physicians, they were storytellers, especially my mother. She used to love to tell stories about patients. She'd tell these to everyone, to the milkman, to the gardener, equally to her students and colleagues. She didn't entirely distinguish sort of professional discourse from ordinary discourse, and I don't distinguish it either.
But after finishing his training, Sacks had doubts about pursuing a medical career and dropped out to travel. First to motorcycle across Canada, where he also worked as a logger and began to write. Then to California, where he became obsessed with weightlifting, even breaking a state record.
I found myself saying, is this all? Is this real life? I think in some sense I came to New York trying to find where the center lay, trying to find myself, trying to find reality. And I think I probably did find it when I started seeing patients.
In 1966, Sacks accepted a job at Beth Abraham Hospital, where he came across an unusual group of 80 patients, all victims of sleeping sickness. Between 1916 and 1927, a world epidemic of sleeping sickness, or viral encephalitis, had killed 1.5 million people. Millions of others were left chronically ill, in a semi-comatose state. Others appeared to recover, but later developed strange symptoms, like the ones Sacks discovered at Beth Abraham and documented on his home movie camera.
The first sight was incredible. I saw motionless people like statues, often in strange postures, catatonic, trance-like, I mean, even in the psychiatric back wards, I'd never seen such a thing. These people turned to stone. And some of them I found had been in the hospital for 30 or 40 years. One wondered at first what was going on inside these people. If they had an inside, I remember once seeing one patient, he sneezed, and this suddenly broke up the Parkinsonism and the catatonia, and he moved and talked for about 30 seconds. And then he froze up again. But in that 30 seconds, a whole personality and something of a human life had been revealed.
First, Sachs gathered these patients into one ward and tried to instill in them a sense of community. He occasionally saw odd signs of life, when, for example, they played catch during physical therapy. In 1969, noticing that their symptoms were similar to those of Parkinson's disease, Sachs decided to treat them with a new drug being used for Parkinson's, L-Dopa.
The effects of this were incredible. Within a week, in some patients even less, they came to, they awakened. Their frozen faces melted, smiles appeared, eyes started to look around and get bright and twinkle. Unused voices appeared, unused muscles started to work. There was certainly a very festive feeling, and perhaps a feeling of elation in the summer of '69. At that point, one wondered whether these patients wondered how many of them could have normal lives, go back into the world, and sort of be cured.
But by September, problems had surfaced as the patients began to develop strange tics, a side effect of the medication. Sachs says he frantically tried to adjust the dose, but to no avail.
And some of the patients started to fluctuate between states of frenzy and stupor, and there was a sort of real feeling of despair then. And I have to say also for myself of guilt. I thought, what have I got these people into? You know, was the drug a false promise? Were they awakened from their stupor only to be thrown into some sort of tormented state, which is worse than the trance?
Sachs kept a journal of this experience. In 1973, encouraged by his patients, he published his first book, Awakenings.
They sort of said, tell our story, or it'll never be known. They felt very neglected. I love the feeling that these forgotten people who are so important, you know, can have a sort of afterlife, you know, and they themselves would like that.
Sachs's sleeping sickness patients live on not only in his book, but also in a play, A Kind of Alaska, by Harold Pinter. And Awakenings isn't the only work by Sachs to take on an artistic life of its own. The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, Sachs's case history of a music teacher who loses the ability to recognize living things, has been turned into an opera, recently performed at New York's Lincoln Center.
And this, quite a likeness, it faded, come remember.
Almost all of your books have inspired other works of art. How do you explain that?
I think these stories are about fighting and surviving and transcending, and we all need to know this.
Sachs's hospital practice has been fertile ground for his writing, but he now finds himself drawn to the outside world, curious about how people with neurological disorders deal with everyday life. He's been making what he calls anthropological house calls, like this recent visit to Toronto, to spend time with Shane Fistel, a young artist with Tourette syndrome.
I don't like a sedentary type of horse. You know, any view like you see statues like this. I like, that kind of feeling instead of sitting. You know,
there's tremendous motion in all your animal paintings and sculptures. Tourette's is a sort of energized state in which there is a sort of convulsive energy, which especially takes the form of excessive movement, of sudden movement, of compulsive movement, tics, of touching, of compulsive noises, sometimes compulsive thoughts. I think with Shane, I have never seen, on the one hand, such severity or maybe intensity of Tourette's, but with such a sort of grace of living and accepting and sort of using it. I mean, I think it's sort of inspiring to see him. You feel your Tourette sometimes bullies or uses you. Do you feel you have ways of using it?
it translates, I think, into my art, my sculpture, my painting.
In which sort of ways?
You know, I can make, I don't know, because I like, because I know I like to touch. I like all these things that I can feed that or unleash it. Unleash it is the word. I know that when I found sculpture, I found that it was perfect. That was my world. I felt at home.
Although he's been researching Tourette syndrome for years and has written several articles, Sacks's book on the subject has yet to materialize. One reason is that he got sidetracked by still another interest, the world of the deaf.
I went down to Gallaudet, this extraordinary university of the deaf, last year when there was this amazing revolt for a deaf president, and which I think wasn't about being disabled, it was about identity, about being recognized as a unique people and needing one of their own as their representative. And I just sort of found myself immensely moved by this and also intellectually enthralled.
Sacks's 4-year study of the deaf resulted in the book Seeing Voices. In honor of its publication, Sacks was a guest at this past summer's Deafway Festival at Gallaudet in Washington, D.C.
Deaf people from 82 countries converged. I think there was something like 9,000 people there. It was extraordinary to see people with 80 different languages, 80 different sign languages, make communication with each other. I mean, there is this precious other world, this special community in our midst, and I think it's lovely to encounter them, to go to the theatre of the deaf and to see something of deaf arts. And there is a rich world there which we don't learn about unless we make an effort.
Okay.
I always wanted to have a beard like that.
Well, you're well on the way to it.
I've always thought that I would study psychology in college. That's where my degree is, my bachelor's degree.
Uh-huh.
I always figured that when I got old, fat, and bald, I would become a psychologist.
Yeah.
You look like what I should be.
And I always wanted to act.
Although Oliver Sacks never realized his acting ambition, he loves to play the piano, surrounded by the works of some of his patients. Paintings by the man with a photographic memory of his earliest childhood surroundings. Sculpture by the colorblind artist. They are constant reminders of his life's work.
I have a need to look at people who've, perhaps through no fault of their own, through biological chance, have been thrust out of the mainstream, and in general to see the tremendous adaptability of the human organism and the human spirit in extreme situations.
100 years from now, how would you like to be remembered?
I would like it to be thought that I had listened carefully to what patients and others had told me, that I tried to imagine what it was like for them, and that I tried to convey this. And to use a biblical term, the feeling he bore witness.
Sacks' account of his sleeping sickness patients is coming to the screen. A film version of Awakenings is now in production, starring Robert De Niro as a patient, Robin Williams as Oliver Sacks.